from the Rockefeller Commission report that 22 years ago, an Army employee was given an after-dinner cordial at a meeting hosted by the CIA in Maryland. That Army employee did not know, and was not told for 20 minutes, that the after-dinner drink had acid, LSD, in it. And 1 week later, that employee was dead. Early in the morning, very early, about 1:30 in the morning, in a hotel room in New York City, he got up, and before his CIA escort could prevent him, he ran right through a closed hotel window, which had the shades drawn over it. The window gave way, and the employee fell 10 stories to his death. Well, that account in the Rockefeller Commission report horrified most readers, but we can only imagine what it did to a Maryland woman, Alice Olson, and her 2 sons, Eric Olson and Niels Olson. They had been told 22 years ago that Frank Olson, their husband and their father, a civilian Army employee working in Maryland at the Fort Detrick Biological Warfare Research Center, after leading a perfectly normal and happy life, had inexplicably killed himself in New York. They were not told anything about the LSD experiment that had set him off, and until they read the Rockefeller Commission report 22 years afterwards, last month, they had spent 2 decades racked with the guilt and the shame that a suicide in a family causes. We spoke to the Olsons this week. Ted Clark, one of our reporters here at the Washington Bureau, reached them at their home by phone, and here is his conversation.
I'm talking to Niels Olson in Frederick, Maryland. Niels, could you tell us briefly the story of your father's death and the circumstances surrounding it?
Well, as far as we know at this point, my father, Frank R. Olson, who was a civilian biochemist working for the United States Army, died shortly after midnight on November 28, 1953. As we understand it, he had been given LSD without his knowledge at a meeting that was being held with several CIA agents who were liaison people between the CIA and the Army research installation that my father worked for. They were at a meeting discussing biological research, and during the week-long meeting in November of 53, they slipped him and 4 other top-level scientists LSD after dinner one evening, and then 20 minutes later they were told that they had been given the LSD, and they were going to be observed to see their reactions to the drug. He developed serious side effects to the drug, and returned from the week-long meeting to our house. My mother noticed very dramatic changes in his personality, as being very despondent and depressed and very quiet and so on. Then he went to work at Fort Detrick here in Frederick on the following Monday, and was considering resigning from his job there. Was talked back into staying on, and then Tuesday it was decided that he would go to see a psychiatrist up in New York City. The psychiatrist, Harold Abramson is his name, was a psychiatrist who had a security clearance, and therefore was, we were told, selected to be the therapist to talk to my father, because my father had a top-level security clearance. My father talked with Abramson for several days during the week after he had been administered the LSD. Then the Friday night, November 27th, 1953, he telephoned my mother to indicate that he was doing okay, that he'd be coming home on Saturday, November 28th. That was the last time that my mother talked to him. Then we received a phone call the next morning from a colleague who had received a phone call from a CIA agent who was up in New York with my father accompanying him, and that was when we were notified that my father had plunged to his death out of a 10th floor window of the Hotel Statler in New York.
Was any explanation given to you about why this had happened? That he had been a participant in this experiment with LSD?
No, we had no knowledge of that. We haven't received any communication whatsoever from the Central Intelligence Agency, and the only thing we were told was that he jumped or fell from the 10th floor window, and it was our understanding that he had just suffered a nervous breakdown, and was very depressed. And my mother believed that during the middle of the night he must have had a severe nightmare, a bad dream or something, where he was just compelled to go at a full run across the hotel room, and leap through a window, a closed window, and the shades were drawn on the window. So it was, that was all that we knew.
Mm-hmm. But he had, prior to this time, had led a happy life and hadn't shown any signs of depression.
No, he had not shown any signs. My mother said that they had a very good marriage. My father was a very loving person and a very giving sort of person who loved his 3 children very much and spent quite a bit of time with us, devoted a lot of energy towards his wife and children. And that was the thing that so threw all of his friends, his wife, and the 3 children, was that we couldn't understand how he had, after being such a good, warm, stable sort of person, the idea that he could suddenly develop a nervous breakdown was something we just couldn't comprehend.
Mm-hmm. When was it that you finally found out that he had been an unwitting participant in this LSD experiment?
That was on June 11th, 1975. We received a phone call from a friend who had seen the story in the Washington Post, a release of some of the information from the Rockefeller Commission report, indicating that from the information that they had cited in the report, that it could be no other person than our father.
And then you have decided to take action against the CIA.
That's correct.
What are you going to be doing?
Number one, be able to get full disclosure of the information concerning our father's death. We feel that the information has not really been disclosed yet, and we feel that it's only through a suit will the CIA relinquish the information that they have, and all those people who have information come forward and speak frankly. In addition, we do feel that a suit will bring about some punitive damages to the CIA. We do feel that the CIA should be held accountable for their actions. I want to say my brother's about to get on the phone here,
Okay,
Eric
sure.
Olson.
Hi, I'm Nils' brother.
Hi, Eric.
Hi. What's your name?
My name's Ted Clark.
You're from Pacifica?
Pacifica Radio, right.
Right, you have station BAI in California, right?
Right, BAI in New York and 2 stations in California, KPFA and KPFK.
Mm-hmm. We're on tape here, Rick. Right.
Yeah. And we also have a station in Texas, KPFT.
Yeah, I know your station. They're really good.
I was going to ask if you know of anybody else, or if any of your father's colleagues who participated in the same experiment. Have you talked to any of them, or do you know who they are?
We know who one of them is.
Uh-huh.
And the material which we've put into our statement, some of it comes from that colleague, and he has asked us not to disclose his identity. I'm sure his identity will come out very shortly, but it hasn't so far, and we promise not to.
Mm-hmm.
So we know who he is. There were 3 others, according to him. One of them is dead, and we know his name. And 2 others are living, and he refused to tell us the names of those 2.
Well, I think I have pretty much the whole story. If you have any comments that you'd like to add,
There's one comment that I have.
Sure.
I don't know whether Nils said this earlier to you, but today, well, to some degree during the press conference, and especially after, we were aware that what we'd really gone through was a real funeral ceremony for our father. And it was a funeral in the sense that we were honoring him and dignifying his death in a way that he couldn't be eulogized at the time he died because no one knew the true story, and there was a sort of mysterious shroud around the way he had died, and it didn't fit with the kind of man that his friends and family knew him to be. And there was a kind of feeling that what was happening today was really a funeral ceremony. We also are very powerful about being able to be involved in that and to make it an event that would have meaning for the whole country.
I think it will. Okay, Eric and Nils, thank you very much for taking the time. I know you must be really tired.
Yeah, we're sort of tired. The Pacifica radio is worth it.
All right. Well, I appreciate your saying that.
For Pacifica in Washington, this is Robert Krulwich, and with Ted Clark, Paz Cohen, Kitty Ferguson, and Paul Chaplin, who contributed to this program, wishing you a good evening.